What defines a great Rocket League player? Is it how much they've earned in tournaments, or maybe how many major tournaments that they've won, whether they could beat the best in the world in a 1v1 show match? Maybe it's their actual skill or leadership or influence on the game as a whole. Well, the great thing is, in the case of Rocket League, it really doesn't matter which criteria you use. There's really only one player who can be considered the GOAT of competitive Rocket League. It's Kaydops.
Now Justin, still on the goal line, bounces back out. Oh! Kaydops! No way! On the half rotation, grabs the ball and takes it away. Now Kaydops, 1v1. You might as well not even be there. Kaydops gets the goal.
Look at how clean this trap is. Kaydops jumping a bit early. He's like, never mind, I'm just gonna go for this. Controls his car beautifully. There's nothing Magnets can do. How do you predict a player to land that smoothly?
At this point, you can't really be a fan of Rocket League esports without at least knowing about this guy, Kaydops. He's been around basically since the beginning of the competitive scene, and he's been completely dominant across multiple teams for about half of the time since major Rocket League tournaments started. But many of you guys don't know his whole story, how he went from a new player on the scene, having never played the prequel to Rocket League, to winning multiple RLCS World Championships, as well as many other majors, now sitting at the top of the overall leaderboard for overall earnings for quite a while actually. My first exposure to Kaydops was way back in the middle of 2016, around the same time as RLCS Season 1, when Kaydops was becoming a relatively dominant ones player in especially the $50 market tournaments that went on weekly. It felt like Kaydops won pretty much every one of those that he played in.
He'll have to defend and work from his own zone. Down to 210. Trailing by 1 in game 5, and a tough shot with a tight angle, and Kaydops throws Kalen in the goal.
Bombs it home. Kaydops. What an angle too. Kalen was waiting. I don't think Kalen thought he was going to be able to find that angle as well.
But what I didn't realize when I started making this video was that Kaydops actually was playing in RLCS all the way back in Season 1. He played for a team called Precision Z, and they did qualify for RLCS, but they didn't qualify for LAN. During the offseason, teams and players were sort of switching around, orgs were leaving the scene and new orgs were joining, and there was a brief few days where apparently Kaydops joined Pocket Aces, but that didn't really last long. So Kaydops went and actually revived Precision Z alongside 2 new players, Skyline and Sicky. Now, if you don't know who Sicky is, he's the guy who scored probably the craziest game winner in Rocket League history before RLCS at the RLC Pro League Finals.
Oh my God. One goal will decide it all. Crown and Jewels back United. Back to the goal. And that's that. Crown and Jewels are the Season 1 Rocket League Central Pro League champions. Unbelievable.
So needless to say, Kaydops had a better team at his side, and though Precision Z struggled a bit during that second season, they managed to qualify for Worlds as the European 4 seed, securing a spot by beating Pocket Aces during the final week of league play. This was the first time I remember seeing Kaydops and really noticing not only the fact that he was an amazing player, but he really had a unique play style. Even the way the casters react to this play shows where the meta was at this time.
Violent Panda had it read and sent it back out, but there was Kaydops to try, and oh my goodness, this angle, that is the tightest angle you could possibly score at.
You didn't have a whole lot of margin for error, and thankfully he kept it accurate. Sicky noticing that ball a bit off target, actually quite a bit off target, but he able to redirect that to the opposite corner, as you said.
Passing plays like this weren't really what people were doing, so they react as though Kaydops just missed this shot and Sicky sort of cleaned up the mess. But we now know this was most definitely not a missed shot, but rather a perfectly placed pass to his teammate. Kaydops had already recognized that the way to beat these teams who just had high-level defense was to play as a team. It was becoming apparent, even this early in the competitive scene, that the teams who would dominate would be the ones who could come together and really play team-based Rocket League. Kaydops' team went on to beat NRG in the first round of the World Finals, only to lose in round 2 to Northern Gaming. formerly Weedham Girls. And then they went on to lose to Take 3 in the lower bracket. Precision Z disbanded shortly after the World Championship, leaving Kaydop in need of a new team. It was around this time that Kaydops started showing up on Johnny Boy's stream for 1v1 show matches against the best players in the world. Now this was when people started really noticing not only how good Kaydop was, but how unique his approach was to the game.
First time that we featured Kaydop on my stream, he's got a super zoomed out camera and he actually uses ball cam more than most other top players that I've seen, so hopefully this will be quite interesting for you guys.
Now, Kaydop did slowly adapt his camera settings to a more conventional setup, but his somewhat excessive use of ball cam when dribbling was never really something that went away. You could always tell when Kaydop had the ball in RLCS because he rarely switched out of ball cam, and he just seemed to be playing the game kind of different. Now, using ball cam for dribbles and things like that and setting up power shots, this is actually something that other players would start doing as Kaydop continued to dominate in RLCS. For Season 3 of the RLCS, Market Aces, which ended up becoming Market EU, which then became Market Esports. Anyways, they picked up Kaydop for their team alongside Fairy Peak and Mystic. So again, Kaydop found himself on a completely new roster alongside an experienced RLCS player in Mystic, but a newcomer in Fairy Peak. Now, Fairy Peak had done well in a bunch of other tournaments, and he was especially good at ones, and he'd done well in Market's actual 1v1 tournaments, and his team before Luminescence had won a bunch of Market tournaments, so it made sense that Market would choose to put him on one of their teams. But this still was a bit of a risky move. Market was one of the biggest orgs in Rocket League at this time, and they decided to go for a team with really only one player who'd had major success in RLCS. Now, Market EU unexpectedly made it all the way to the grand finals in Season 3 through the upper bracket, only to lose by a hair to Northern Gaming in Game 7 of a bracket reset. This was the first time Kaydop had come close to winning a major Rocket League tournament, and it really was the beginning of what would go on to be the biggest run of any Rocket League team. Now, Gale Force Esports came into the Rocket League scene by picking up the Season 2 grand finalists, Market EU, only to fail to make it to the World Championship in Season 3. During that offseason following Kaydop's second place finish, Gale Force decided to pick up Kaydop to play alongside their player Violent Panda, but they were still in need of a third going into the summer DreamHack, so they decided to use Turbo as a stand-in for the tournament. This roster made it all the way to the grand finals, only to lose to Flipside. Gale Force then signed Turbo onto their team, and this was the beginning of the most dominant roster Rocket League has ever seen to date. This would go on to be the summer of second places though for Kaydop and his teammates, as they lose again in the grand finals of the X Games Invitational and again to the Muffin Men at DreamHack Atlanta. They did win the 2v2 Universal Open that summer, the first official win for this roster, even if it was under a different format than the traditional 3v3. So they were primed and ready for RLCS Season 4, where Gale Force would absolutely dominate the field, though there were some close matches like their initial match against Method to go to the grand finals of Worlds. They would win the grand finals against that same team with a 4-0 sweep. At this point, most of the talk about who is the best player in the world and who is the best of all time primarily centered around Turbopolsa. He was the first player to hold more than one world championship, and he would go on again to take a third in the next season after Dignitas bought the roster in between winning the regional championships and then playing at the world championships in Season 5. Now, Dignitas didn't have the same run as Season 4. They were forced to go through the lower bracket, sent there by a team that they would eventually face in the grand finals, NRG. Kaydop would go on to earn the MVP and his second world championship in a row. Kaydop and really Dignitas in general were setting the standard for competitive Rocket League. In future seasons, it would continue to be the teams who would really come together and sort of play selfless Rocket League, focusing on passing and defense and really just solid rotations. But Season 6 was another story. Dignitas had the first ever undefeated regular season, but the machine of Dignitas was forced to face off against another kind of play style in the grand finals of the World Championship. Cloud9 had all the momentum, and they had the crowd behind them as Squishy led his team all the way through the lower bracket and ultimately to a bracket reset and a total dominance of Dignitas. This was their first loss in any RLCS match in a very, very long time. And in some ways, this was the end of multiple eras, the end of the Dignitas dynasty, this unbeatable roster. Cloud9 had, I guess, cracked the code, and it happened in a way that nobody predicted. Who knew that flip resets and flashy plays was the way to take down these giants? But it was also the end of that era. After this, the highest level of Rocket League just didn't look the same. Even though they did win in Season 6, playing a very free sort of Rocket League, Cloud9 doesn't even really play this way anymore. Players like Justin, who have such incredible mechanics, yes, they pull off amazing shots sometimes, but the gameplay is so fast that it's gotten to where it's almost better, just getting a 50-50 and rotating out. Dignitas, and especially Kaydop in my opinion, left that mark on Rocket League. Being able to set up an infield pass is still more important than being able to hit flip resets. Playing in sync, especially when the pressure's on and you're defending from multiple areas, communicating well, all of these things are the things that make a great team in modern Rocket League. So Kaydop ultimately ended up leaving Dignitas to go play for Team Vitality alongside Scrubkilla and Fairy Peak. Kaydop had come full swing from Season 3 to play alongside Fairy Peak again and attempt to get another World Championship. This time, Kaydop was the veteran player, though obviously Fairy Peak had been around the scene for quite a while, and Scrubkilla had had 1 season in RLCS. So in some ways, they were all veterans, but Kaydop was the one who had really been able to pull out wins. Now this roster is very interesting. Here it was made up of arguably the 3 greatest 1v1 players of all time. If you were to make a list of the best, these 3 would at least be in the top 4. But that didn't mean they were setting out to win through solo plays. At this point, Kaydop was pretty much out of the 1 scene, and his entire game centered around passing and scoring, mainly taking advantage of holes in teams' defense. Vitality went 7-1 in the regular season, and after winning the regional championships, they faced off against G2 in their pool play for Worlds on day 2 after beating Ground Zero on day 1. G2 won in 4 games, forcing them to then have to play NRG in their first match of the final single elimination bracket of day 3. So this was the new setup for the tournament in Season 7. There was no lower bracket, and no bracket reset for the final day. It was either win or go home. Vitality turned things on day 3 as they nearly swept NRG and then took Cloud9 down in a 4-0 sweep to ultimately face off against G2 again in the grand finals. Both teams were hot and G2 really came out swinging. With just a minute left, Kaydops set up a pass to Scrub, scoring a goal, and ultimately the clock hit 0 seconds as the game came down to the wire.
Can't stop him there. Around the corner, Chicago, it bounces off the rim. Scrub, he grabs the ball. Kaydop the kill it. Kaydops blows it downfield. Fairy Peak, midfield. He's under 1. Fairy Peak carrying this to Kaydop. Into the back wall. Scrub, Kaydops scores. 0 seconds. Unbelievable. The game is not over until that ball touches the ground. A hard lesson to learn, but Scrub Killer will teach it to you. Vitality send it to overtime. School's in session. We're in overtime.
This first game really set the tone for the entire series. So much energy was spent in this overtime, it felt like the entire series rested on what happened here, and that's ultimately what did happen. Vitality played incredible the rest of this series, as did G2, but ultimately Vitality won in overtime of Game 5. So how did Kaydop end up in this place? A 3-time world champion, the most winning and most earning player in Rocket League history. In some ways, I think it goes all the way back to the beginning, when we first saw Kaydop playing a different kind of Rocket League than we're used to, even taking down players like Scrub in 1v1s with a playstyle that was really ahead of its time. Rocket League feels like a game of chess for Kaydop, and those early camera settings really exaggerated his outlook on the game. It was never about flashy mechanics or plays, it's that long game. It's about hitting solid, hard, direct, accurate shots, well-executed touches, patience on defense, and ultimately executing when it came time to score. It's about being the absolute best in the most important areas. And in a lot of ways, Kaydop plays Rocket League the way that we should all play Rocket League. Yes, it's fun to learn like a fancy new skill, and those things are important, but the best teammates in Rocket League are usually the ones that you can trust to be in the right place and to execute when you need them to. And this is why I would take a Kaydop on my team over anybody else in the world, because I know he's not interested in anything but winning and doing whatever it takes to win. This is why Kaydop is on top, and why I imagine he'll stay there for a very long time.